If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. The morning sun bathed the imposing mansion in Kensington Gardens, one of London's most exclusive neighbourhoods. George Anderson observed the portrait of his late wife, Florence, which rested on the mahogany desk. The longing was still a constant weight, even 2 years after her passing. At 45, owner of one of the country's largest construction companies, George had partially rebuilt his life alongside Patricia Miller, a stunning 35-year-old woman he had met at a charity event. The marriage, celebrated just 8 months prior, seemed perfect in the eyes of London's high society. Patricia displayed the 7-year-old twins, Peter and Mary, like trophies at social events, always impeccably dressed and well-behaved. But something deeply bothered George. "Sir, coffee is served," announced Mrs. Zola, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for over a decade. "Thank you, Zola. Have the children come down yet?" "No, sir. Mrs. Patricia said they are grounded this morning. It seems they broke a vase in their room." George frowned. It was the 3rd time that week the children were grounded for seemingly trivial reasons. Florence had never been strict with her children. On the contrary, the house had always been full of laughter and mischief. Since the new marriage, however, a disturbing silence hung over the mansion's corridors. Upon descending for coffee, George found Patricia leafing through a fashion magazine, completely absorbed. Her long black hair cascaded over her shoulders, covered by an Italian silk blouse. "Good morning. Aren't the children having breakfast?" "Good morning, darling. No. They need to learn that actions have consequences. That Ming vase was a relic. But they're just children, Patricia. Accidents happen." Patricia lifted her eyes from the magazine, her gaze suddenly cold. "That's exactly why they need discipline, George. You spoiled them too much after Florence passed away." The casual mention of his late wife's name bothered him. Patricia always found ways to criticize how Florence had raised the children. That afternoon, while working in his office on the top floor of the Anderson Tower in central London, George couldn't concentrate. Images of his dejected and silent children flooded his mind. When was the last time he had heard them laugh? When was the last time Peter had challenged him to a game of football in the garden? Or Mary had asked for a story before bed? "Mr. Anderson, Mr. Charles from the development company is on the line," his secretary Lois informed him via the intercom. "Tell him I'll call back later, Lois. I need to sort out a personal matter." George picked up his phone and called his old college friend, Maurice, now a renowned private investigator. "Maurice, I need your help, but I can't explain over the phone. Can we meet at the Ritz Tea Room in half an hour?" At the traditional tea room in central London, George laid out his concerns. "I'm afraid I'm becoming paranoid, Maurice, but something isn't right. My children have changed completely. They're apathetic, scared. Patricia says it's just a phase, but—" "And you want me to investigate your wife?" Maurice asked, as direct as ever. "Not exactly. She would never let a stranger observe her at home. And the security cameras, she'd know if I checked them." George hesitated, spinning his coffee cup between his fingers. "I have an idea, but I need your help to execute it." "I'm listening." "I'm going to step away from business for a few weeks. I'll say I need to visit some construction sites in Scotland. Meanwhile, I want to observe my own home." Maurice raised his eyebrows. "How do you plan to do that?" "My gardener, Mr. Anthony, is about to retire. Patricia has already mentioned she needs to hire someone new. Could you provide me with a false identity, documents, and help me with a convincing disguise?" "Are you serious? You want to disguise yourself as a gardener in your own home? It's the only way to find out what really happens when I'm not around." Maurice sighed, recognizing the determination in his friend's eyes. "You'll need more than fake documents, George. You'll need to modify your appearance, your way of speaking, your gestures. Your wife knows you well. I'll do whatever it takes." 2 weeks later, George looked at his own reflection without recognizing himself. The grizzled beard, hair dyed with white streaks and cut differently, artificially aged and sun-tanned skin, thick-rimmed glasses, and a slight hunch, the result of hours of practice, completely transformed his appearance. "Now you are Sebastian Parker, 62 years old, a widower originally from Yorkshire, with experience in gardening on inland farms," explained Maurice, handing him a folder with documents. "The Tiway Employment Agency has already been informed. Patricia called yesterday requesting an experienced gardener. They will recommend you." That same night, while Patricia slept, George entered the children's room. Peter was huddled under the covers, even with the warmth of London. Mary firmly hugged a teddy bear, a gift from her biological mother. A tear rolled down George's face as he gently kissed his children's foreheads. "Daddy will find out what's happening," he whispered, more to himself than to the sleeping children. The next day, George officially departed for Edinburgh, where he supposedly would spend 2 weeks supervising projects. In reality, he checked into a modest hotel in an outer London borough, preparing to begin his investigation. Meanwhile, at the Anderson mansion, Patricia received a call from the employment agency. "Mrs. Miller Anderson, we've found the perfect gardener for your residence. Sebastian Parker has decades of experience and is available to start immediately." "Excellent. You can send him tomorrow for an interview. I can't stand seeing that garden neglected since old Mr. Anthony decided to retire." Little did Patricia know that in less than 24 hours, her husband would be back at the mansion, not as the powerful businessman George Anderson, but as Sebastian, a simple gardener who would witness secrets that should never come to light. Sebastian Parker, or rather George in disguise, walked through the gates of his own mansion with a racing heart. He carried a small, worn leather bag and wore simple clothes, faded denim trousers, a plaid shirt, and a straw hat to protect him from the strong London sun. As he was led to the back entrance by one of the security guards, he tried to maintain the hunched posture and slightly shuffling gait he had practiced for days. "Wait here, the lady will be with you shortly," said the guard, pointing to a wooden bench near the kitchen door. George sat down, observing his property with new eyes. Outside, the lush garden that Florence had been so proud of showed signs of neglect. The rare orchids, collected by his late wife, looked less vibrant, and the flower beds urgently needed care. The door opened, and Patricia appeared, impeccably dressed even at that hour of the morning. Her cold eyes scrutinized Sebastian from head to toe. "So you are the gardener the agency recommended?" "Yes, madam," George replied, deepening his voice and adopting a rural accent. "Sebastian Parker, at your service. Do you have experience with gardens of this size? I worked 20 years on a farm in Yorkshire, then another 15 in mansions in Hampstead Heath," George lied, repeating the story he had memorized. Patricia seemed satisfied with the answer. "The rules are simple. The garden must be impeccable. You have access only to the external areas and staff quarters. You must not, under any circumstances, interact with my stepchildren without my authorization. Understood?" "Yes, madam," George replied, feeling a pang of anger at how Patricia referred to his own children. "The housekeeper, Mrs. Zola, will show you to your room at the back and explain your routine. Your salary will be deposited monthly with no advances. Any questions?" "No, madam." "When can I start?" "Immediately. I want the front flower beds reorganized by the end of the day." With that, Patricia turned and went back inside the house, leaving a trail of expensive perfume in the air. Moments later, Mrs. Zola appeared, in her traditional impeccably pressed uniform and grey hair tied in a bun. "Come, Mr. Sebastian. I'll show you where you'll be staying." Mrs. Zola, who had worked for the family for years, showed no sign of recognition to George's relief. His disguise was working. The room assigned to Sebastian was modest but clean. A single bed, a small wardrobe, a bedside table with a simple lamp, and a window overlooking the back garden. It was surreal to be staying as an employee in his own residence. "The bathroom is shared down the hall," explained Mrs. Zola. "Breakfast is at 6, lunch at noon, and dinner at 7. We don't serve meals outside these hours." "Understood, madam. Thank you." "Mr. George, the owner of the house, is travelling on business. When he is here, the lady likes the garden to be especially beautiful for social events." George nodded, noticing a certain tension in the housekeeper's voice when mentioning social events. After leaving his small luggage in the room, Sebastian headed to the tool shed. As he organized the material he would use, he saw the children for the first time since he had assumed the disguise. Peter and Mary were sitting on a bench near the gazebo, both downcast, listlessly flipping through books. They wore formal clothes, unsuitable for the heat and for children's play. Sebastian approached, pretending to clear dry leaves near the bench. "Good morning, children," he greeted in a gentle tone. Peter looked up, suspicious. "Good morning," he replied shyly. "Are you the new gardener?" "Yes, Sebastian Parker, at your service." Mary, always the more talkative of the two, remained silent, just watching with sad eyes. George felt a tightening in his chest as he noticed the change in his daughter's behavior. "Do you like plants?" Sebastian asked, trying to establish a connection. Peter shrugged. "Mommy doesn't let us touch the garden. She says we'll get our clothes dirty." "I see. Well, if you ever want to learn about flowers, I can show you a few things. With your stepmother's permission, of course." At that moment, Patricia's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Peter! Mary! Time for piano lesson!" The children stood up instantly, like little soldiers in formation. George noticed how mechanical their movements were, as if they were operating under constant tension. "We're coming, Mom," Peter replied, his voice almost inaudible. As they walked away, Mary dropped a small notebook. Sebastian quickly picked it up and called out to the girl, but she had already entered the house. Upon opening the notebook to check for any identification, George was stunned. What he saw were drawings. Disturbing drawings that showed a tall, menacing female figure hovering over two frightened children. Putting the notebook in his pocket, he promised to return it to the girl as soon as possible. More importantly, that was the first tangible indication that his suspicions were founded. As evening fell, while finishing work in the front garden, Sebastian noticed a car arrive. A young woman of approximately 25 years old stepped out, carrying a small bag. She wore simple jeans, a white t-shirt, and had her curly hair tied in an unpretentious ponytail. "Good afternoon," she greeted with a shy smile. "Is this the Anderson family home?" "Yes, it is," Sebastian replied, leaning on his hoe. "Can I help you?" "I'm Julia Riley, the children's new private tutor. I start today." George then remembered that Patricia had mentioned before his trip hiring a tutor to reinforce the twins' studies during the school holidays. "I'm Sebastian, the gardener. I also started today." Julia smiled, her brown eyes lighting up. There was a genuine kindness on her face that contrasted with the oppressive atmosphere of the mansion. Two newcomers on the same day. "I hope we adapt well," she said, extending her hand. George shook the young woman's hand, feeling a strange sense of comfort in that brief human contact. "The main entrance is over there," he indicated, "but for us staff, it's better to use the back door." "Thanks for the tip." Julia headed for the service entrance, and Sebastian returned to his work, watching her out of the corner of his eye. There was something about that young woman that conveyed honesty and candor, qualities increasingly rare in that environment. During dinner in the staff kitchen, Sebastian discovered more about Julia. A recent pedagogy graduate from UCL, she had been recommended by an agency specializing in private tutors for high-net-worth families. "The lady of the house seems demanding," Julia commented, choosing her words carefully. Mrs. Zola, who was serving the soup, exchanged meaningful glances with the cook. "Mrs. Patricia likes things her way," the housekeeper replied diplomatically, "especially when it comes to the children." "How are the little ones?" Julia asked. "They are good children," Mrs. Zola replied with a sigh. "Ever since their mother, ever since Mr. George's first wife left us, they've changed a lot. And after the new marriage, well..." The housekeeper stopped herself as if she had said too much. Sebastian kept his eyes fixed on his plate, feigning disinterest in the conversation, but absorbing every word. Later, upon returning to his room, Sebastian passed by the corridor leading to the children's bedrooms. He stopped when he heard muffled sounds of crying. Silently approaching the half-open door, he saw Julia sitting on the edge of Mary's bed, comforting the sobbing girl. "I can't do the math exercises," Mary cried. "Mommy will be angry with me again." "Don't worry," Julia whispered, stroking the child's hair. "We'll practice together. First thing tomorrow morning before your stepmother wakes up. It will be our secret, okay?" Mary nodded, wiping away her tears. "Promise you won't tell her I cried." I promise. Now try to get some sleep." George silently stepped away, a lump in his throat. In just one day of observation, his worst suspicions were beginning to be confirmed, but he needed more proof, concrete evidence about Patricia's behavior. And, by all indications, he had just found an unexpected ally in Julia, even if she didn't know it yet. Lying on his narrow bed, Sebastian planned his next steps, as he listened to the distant sound of a party on a yacht on the River Thames. Outside, London continued its normal life, while within those walls of marble and privilege, a silent drama unfolded, a drama he was determined to interrupt, whatever the cost. A week had passed since Sebastian began working at the mansion. The garden already showed signs of recovery under his care, with the flower beds reorganized and the plants precisely pruned. But it wasn't the only transformation underway at the Anderson estate. George, behind his disguise, was daily collecting evidence of Patricia's abusive behavior. On Wednesday morning, while watering the ferns near the music room window, Sebastian witnessed Patricia reprimanding Peter during his piano lesson. "How many times do I have to repeat myself? Chopin isn't played like that." Patricia's voice was controlled but sharp as glass. "Your father invested a fortune in this German piano, and you dishonor it with this mediocre interpretation." Peter, just 7 years old, fought back tears as his small fingers trembled over the keys. "Sorry, Mom, I'll try again." "Don't call me Mom when you disappoint me like this." Patricia adjusted her pearl necklace. "Your biological mother may have accepted mediocrity, but I don't." Sebastian squeezed the handle of the watering can so hard that his knuckles turned white. The disrespectful mention of Florence was a cruel provocation, especially in the child's presence. That afternoon, while working near Julia's room, the private tutor approached carrying children's books. "The orchids are beautiful, Mr. Sebastian," she commented, stopping to admire the newly revitalized flowers. "You have a gift." "Thank you, miss. One needs to understand what each plant needs," he replied, maintaining his rural accent. "Some need sun, others shade. Some more water, others less." "Like children," Julia observed with a sigh. "Each one has their needs." George recognized the cue for a deeper conversation. "The little ones seem sad," he ventured. Julia looked around, making sure they were alone. "It's not just sadness, it's fear," she whispered. "Peter had an accident yesterday. He wet the bed during the night. Mrs. Patricia made him clean everything by himself and go without breakfast. He's 7 years old, for goodness sake." Sebastian felt his stomach churn at the information. "And the master? Their father doesn't do anything. He's traveling, it seems, but honestly, I don't know if it would make a difference. She's convincing when she wants to be, from what Mrs. Zola told me. In front of him, she's the perfect stepmother." George felt guilt gnawing at him from within. How could he have been so blind? "A child shouldn't live in fear," Sebastian murmured, more to himself than to Julia. "I completely agree." Julia hugged the books to her chest. "That's why I'm trying to create moments of joy in our lessons. Little escapes, but it's difficult when they are constantly under surveillance." "You seem like a good person, Miss Julia." She smiled sadly. "I just do what anyone would do, or should do." When Julia walked away, Sebastian returned to his room and retrieved a small recorder that Maurice had provided him from under the mattress. He needed to document Patricia's behavior more concretely. The next day, during the staff breakfast, Mrs. Zola entered the kitchen visibly agitated. "The lady is planning a dinner for this Saturday. She wants the garden impeccable, Mr. Sebastian, and you, Julia, will present the children's progress in their studies." Julia paled. "But it's only 2 weeks of lessons. It's not enough time to—" "She doesn't want to hear that," Mrs. Zola interrupted. "She wants to display the children like trophies to her high society friends." Sebastian saw an opportunity in that dinner. With the house full of guests, it would be easier to strategically place recorders and collect evidence of Patricia's true character. That same afternoon, Sebastian found Mary hidden behind a tree in the garden, clutching her drawing notebook. Her eyes were red from crying. "What happened, little one?" he asked gently, crouching beside her. Mary hesitated, but something in the old gardener's kindness made her trust him. She tore up my drawing. The girl's voice was just a whisper. It was a portrait of my real mother. I drew it from memory. George felt a pang in his chest. Mary was barely 5 when Florence passed away. Her memories were already fading. Why did she do that? She said I was living in the past, that now she is my mother and that— Mary swallowed hard. That if I keep drawing Mommy Florence, she'll throw away all my photos of her. Sebastian fought the urge to reveal his identity at that moment and put an end to the situation. Instead, he took a small card with a photo folded in half from his pocket. I have something for you, but it's our secret, right? Mary nodded, curious. Sebastian unfolded the paper, revealing a small photo of Florence that he carried with him. Once I saw this lady in a magazine. She looked a lot like you. I thought you might like to have it for your drawings. Mary's eyes lit up as she recognized her mother. Mommy, she exclaimed softly, taking the photo with reverence. Thank you, Mr. Sebastian. Keep it well hidden. And remember, it's our secret. Mary impulsively hugged the gardener before running back to the house, hiding the photo inside the notebook. That small interaction renewed George's determination. He couldn't delay any longer. On Saturday, during dinner, he would put his plan into action. On Friday, the eve of the event, Sebastian was called to Patricia's office to discuss the floral arrangements. Upon entering the room, he found her on the phone, speaking in a conspiratorial tone. Yes, Caroline, everything is planned. George will extend his trip for 2 more weeks. The divorce will be announced when he returns. Patricia laughed coldly. Of course, I'll get custody of the children. They are my ticket to the Anderson fortune. The will is clear. If he wants to maintain control of his father's businesses, he needs to ensure the heirs remain under the family name. Sebastian froze at the door, absorbing the meaning of those words. Patricia was not only mistreating his children, she was conspiring to gain custody of them in a planned divorce, using them as instruments to access the family fortune. I need to hang up, Caroline. The gardener is here. Patricia hung up the phone and turned to Sebastian with an artificial smile. Come in, Sebastian. We need to discuss tomorrow's arrangements. For the next 20 minutes, George had to endure detailed instructions about the flowers while his blood boiled. Now he understood the true extent of Patricia's manipulation. It wasn't just gratuitous cruelty, it was a calculated plan. Upon leaving the office, he almost collided with Julia in the hallway. She was carrying a tray with tea and biscuits, probably for the children. Are you all right, Mr. Sebastian? You look pale. I heard things. Bad things in the mistress's office, he whispered, pulling her into a discreet corner. She's planning something against the children, against their father. Julia frowned, placing the tray on a side table. What exactly did you hear? Sebastian hesitated. He couldn't reveal everything without compromising his secret identity. She wants custody of them, not for love, but for money. Julia's eyes widened. That would explain a lot. Last night, I found Mary crying because her stepmother forced her to record a video saying how much she loves her new mommy. It was disturbing. We need to protect them, Sebastian stated with conviction. We? What can we do? We're just staff. Perhaps more than that. Sebastian looked intensely into her eyes. You care about those children. So do I. That's a start. Julia studied the old gardener's face, as if trying to decipher something. There's something different about you, Mr. Sebastian. I can't explain it, but I feel like I can trust you. And you can, he assured her. Tomorrow, during dinner, I'll need your help. I'm going to place small recorders around the house. If Mrs. Patricia shows her true face in front of the guests, that's risky. We could lose our jobs. Some things are more important than jobs, don't you think? Julia hesitated only for a moment before nodding. The children deserve protection. Count me in. When Julia walked away, Sebastian felt, for the first time in weeks, a glimmer of hope. He was no longer alone in that mission. He had an ally who, unknowingly, was helping a desperate father save his own children. That night, While planning every detail for the next day, Sebastian observed the illuminated mansion from the garden. Behind the silk curtains and imposing walls of his own home, his children were living a daily nightmare. The thought was unbearable. Tomorrow, he promised himself, looking at the moon shining over the River Thames, tomorrow all this ends. What he didn't know was that fate was preparing even more dramatic twists than he could imagine. Saturday dawned with a typical London sky, a deep, cloudless blue foreshadowing a hot day. Sebastian was up before sunrise, preparing the final details for that night's dinner. As he arranged the flower beds that would adorn the entrance, he saw Julia discreetly leaving through the back door, carrying a small bag. "Good morning, Mr. Sebastian," she greeted him with a tense smile. "I'm going to the bookstore to get some materials for the children's presentation. Mrs. Patricia wants them to recite poems in French for the guests." "French? They're barely 7, Sebastian commented, indignant. "Exactly. That's why I need cue cards. I can't let them be humiliated in front of everyone." Julia's genuine concern for the children's well-being touched George deeply. "You have a good heart, Miss Julia. The children are lucky to have you." A slight blush colored the young teacher's cheeks. "I'll be back in an hour before she wakes up," she said, hurrying along the stone path that led to the side gate. Sebastian continued his work, strategically positioning potted plants that would hide the small recorders. Maurice had provided him with 5 lighter-sized devices, practically imperceptible when well camouflaged. Around 10 in the morning, while adjusting the roses on the terrace, Sebastian saw Patricia leading the children to the main hall. Both wore formal clothes, Peter in a miniature navy suit, and Mary in a white lace dress that seemed uncomfortable for a child her age. "Straighten your back, Mary. Peter, stop fiddling with your tie." Patricia's voice echoed through the open French doors. "You have to be perfect tonight. Some guests are High Court judges. We need them to see how well raised you are." "Yes, Mother," they replied in unison, with monotonous voices. "And remember, any mistake in the poems, any blunder during dinner, and there will be no zoo trip next weekend. Are we understood?" The children nodded in silence. When Patricia turned to check the table decorations, Sebastian saw Peter furtively wipe a tear with his jacket sleeve. At noon, Julia returned, visibly agitated. She sought Sebastian in the garden and, making sure they were alone, whispered, "We need to talk. I found out something terrible." "What is it?" "At the bookstore, I ran into an acquaintance who works at the law firm representing the Anderson family. She told me that Mrs. Patricia consulted a child custody specialist lawyer 2 weeks ago, alleging neglect on Mr. George's part." Sebastian paled. "What kind of neglect?" "She's building a case, claiming he prioritizes business over the children, is rarely present, and that the little ones feel abandoned. Worse still, she's documenting concerning behaviors in the children, which, according to her, are the result of paternal absence. Behaviors she herself provokes," Sebastian concluded, feeling his blood boil. "Exactly, it's an elaborate trap. And there's more. She intends to demand millions in compensation for the emotional alienation the children would suffer if their father tried to separate them from her after the divorce. The strategy was diabolical in its complexity. Patricia was not only mistreating George's children, but was creating a legal scenario to hold him responsible for the children's suffering, thus securing a fortune in compensation. "How can someone be so calculating?" Sebastian murmured, more to himself than to Julia. "I still don't understand why you're so involved in all this," Julia observed, studying him with inquisitive eyes. "It's more than just compassion, isn't it?" Sebastian looked away, feeling he was close to revealing his secret. "I have grandchildren the age." "Of those children," he improvised, "seeing any child suffer reminds me of them." Julia seemed to accept the explanation, albeit with a shadow of doubt in her eyes. "Well, does the plan for tonight still stand?" she asked. "More than ever. I'll position the recorders before the guests arrive. I need you to create a distraction when I give the signal." As the afternoon progressed, the mansion transformed for the party. Extra staff were hired to serve guests, florists delivered sophisticated arrangements, and a catering team set up in the main kitchen. Amidst the organized chaos, Sebastian moved discreetly, positioning the recording devices, one under the main table, another behind a vase in the entrance hall, a third in the library where digestives would be served after dinner, and the last two in the corridors leading to the children's rooms. Around 6 o'clock, as Sebastian was finishing the arrangements on the terrace, he saw Mrs. Zola hurrying out of the children's wing, carrying stained sheets. Her face was tense. "What happened, Mrs. Zola?" he asked, intercepting her in the back corridor. "Little Peter had an accident again. He's terrified, because his stepmother threatened to expose him to the guests if he doesn't stop with this spoiled child nonsense, as she puts it." The housekeeper sighed heavily. 30 years working in family homes, and I've never seen a woman so cold towards children. And the girl, Mary, is hiding in her room. Mrs. Patricia reprimanded her for not being able to correctly pronounce one of the French verses. She said she's going to make her recite it in front of everyone anyway, so she learns from the humiliation. Sebastian felt his stomach churn. "That's cruelty, Mrs. Zola." The housekeeper looked around, making sure no one heard them. "Something strange is happening in this house, Mr. Sebastian. Last night I overheard Mrs. Patricia on the phone, talking about how the Anderson assets would be re-evaluated after the divorce, and how she would ensure her fair share. I'm not educated, but I know greed when I see it. Have you tried to warn the master, Mr. George?" Mrs. Zola lowered her eyes. "I've tried to hint a few times when he called, but she's always nearby, monitoring conversations, and now, with him traveling so much—" She shook her head. "The children are practically left to their own devices." George felt the weight of guilt grow even heavier. How could he have been so blind? At 7 o'clock, the first guests began to arrive. Luxurious cars pulled up to the circular entrance of the mansion, dropping off important businessmen, judges, politicians, and their elegant wives. Patricia, stunning in a high-fashion red dress, welcomed everyone with her practiced charm as the perfect hostess. Sebastian, now dressed in a more formal uniform to serve at the party, watched everything carefully. He saw when Patricia introduced the children to the guests, both with rehearsed smiles and dull eyes. Peter trembled slightly, and Mary kept her hands clasped together, her small knuckles white with tension. During the cocktail hour in the garden, Sebastian discreetly approached Julia, who was circulating among the guests, wearing a simple but elegant dress, borrowed from Mrs. Zola for the occasion. "Everything is prepared," he murmured, while pretending to offer canapes. "The recorders are positioned. We just need to ensure she reveals her true self." "How will we do that?" "The children. She loses control when they make mistakes. We need to—" Sebastian stopped himself when he saw one of the guests approaching. "The arrangements are magnificent," commented the man, a middle-aged businessman, whom George recognized as one of his partners. "The previous gardener didn't have half your talent." "Thank you, sir," Sebastian replied, bowing slightly. The businessman moved away, and Julia quickly whispered, "The children's presentation will be right after dinner in the music room. It's our best chance." Sebastian nodded and resumed circulating among the guests. While serving drinks, he noticed something disturbing. Patricia was deliberately showing off the children to a man in a grey suit, whom George recognized as an influential family court judge. "They are so well behaved," Patricia said, stroking Peter's hair with feigned affection. "Of course they miss their father, but I try to compensate for his constant absence." The judge nodded sympathetically, clearly impressed by the devoted stepmother. "Your dedication is admirable, Mrs. Anderson, especially considering they are not your biological children." "They are as if they were my own," she replied, with a calculated tear in the corner of her eye. "Sometimes I wonder if their father realizes how lucky he is. So many trips, so many commitments. Children need stability." Sebastian gritted his teeth, realizing the maneuver. Patricia was planting seeds for her plan, creating witnesses who would later confirm her version of events. Dinner proceeded with the expected pomp of a high society event. Sebastian and other staff served the elaborate dishes while guests discussed politics, business, and the latest social scandals. The children, sitting next to Patricia, barely touched their food, focused on maintaining their posture and not making mistakes. It was then that Mary, trying to reach her glass of water, accidentally knocked it over, wetting the imported linen tablecloth. A momentary silence fell over the table. "I'm sorry," the terrified girl whispered. Patricia's eyes flashed, but her smile remained intact. There were still guests present. "It was nothing, darling," she replied with false sweetness, while her hand squeezed the girl's arm under the table hard enough to leave marks. Accidents happen. Sebastian, who was passing behind them at that moment, saw everything. The contrast between the public smile and the private cruelty was nauseating. After dinner, guests were led to the music room for the children's presentation. The moment Sebastian and Julia had planned had finally arrived. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia announced, positioning the children in front of the grand piano, "Peter and Mary have prepared something special for you tonight with the help of their tutor." Julia stepped forward, discreetly distributing cue cards to the children. "They will recite verses by Victor Hugo in French," Patricia continued, looking challengingly at Mary. The girl began to recite, her voice small and trembling. The first few lines went well, but soon she hesitated, forgetting the next line. Peter tried to help her, whispering, but also got confused. Panic took over the children's faces as the guests waited, some with understanding smiles, others with polite impatience. It was then that Sebastian, executing the agreed-upon plan, accidentally dropped a tray with champagne glasses. The crash and clinking of breaking crystal created the perfect distraction. As everyone turned to see what had happened, Julia took the opportunity to quickly whisper the next lines to the children. "1,000 pardons!" exclaimed Sebastian, feigning consternation. Patricia shot him a furious glare before turning back to the guests with a forced smile. "I apologize for the incident. Please, the children will continue now." Peter and Mary, with Julia's discreet help, managed to finish the recitation. The applause was polite, and Patricia seemed satisfied with the impression created, that of a dedicated stepmother presenting talented and well-behaved children. But Sebastian knew that the night was just beginning. The real drama was yet to come, and he was prepared to capture every word, every gesture, that would reveal the true face of Patricia Miller Anderson. As the night progressed, guests dispersed across the terrace and through the mansion's halls. The atmosphere was one of relaxation after the formal dinner, with groups chatting animatedly while waiters circulated, offering digestives and coffee. Sebastian moved discreetly among them, checking if the recorders remained correctly positioned. His eyes constantly sought the children, who had disappeared after the presentation. Worried, he headed to the corridor leading to the bedrooms, where he found Julia standing at Mary's bedroom door. "She locked them in here," the teacher whispered, indignant. "She said they had played their part and now shouldn't bother the adults." Sebastian approached the door and heard muffled sobs coming from inside. "Can you open it?" "I already tried. The key isn't in the lock." At that moment they heard the sound of heels approaching down the corridor. Julia quickly stepped away, pretending to adjust a painting on the wall, while Sebastian crouched down, intending to examine the baseboard. Patricia appeared, accompanied by 2 elegant women. "And here are the children's rooms," she explained, as if conducting a museum tour. "I maintain a strict routine for them. Structure is fundamental in their father's absence." "You are so dedicated, Patricia," commented one of the women, a socialite known for her charity work. "Raising children who are not your own with so much love, it's admirable." "I do my best. Sometimes I wonder if George values my efforts." Patricia sighed theatrically. "You can't imagine how difficult it is to balance discipline and affection when you're a stepmother. Any mistake and malicious comments quickly arise." Sebastian exchanged a meaningful look with Julia. Patricia's performance was impeccable, carefully constructing her image as a misunderstood victim. The women continued down the corridor, and Julia approached Sebastian again. "We can't leave them locked in," she whispered. "Go distract the guests. Say you'll show them the educational materials you use with the children or something. I'll take care of this." Julia nodded and walked away, while Sebastian took a small tool case from his pocket that he always carried for his garden work. With surprising skill for a supposed elderly man, he forced the lock until he heard a soft click. Upon opening the door, he found Peter and Mary, sitting on the bed hugging each other. The boy was trying to comfort his sister, who was still sobbing. "Mr. Sebastian!" exclaimed Peter, surprised. "I came to see how you are," he replied, entering and closing the door behind him. "What happened?" "Mommy Patricia said we embarrassed her," Peter explained, with the forced maturity of a child who had grown up too fast. "She said we're going to be punished when the guests leave." "What kind of punishment?" Sebastian asked, feeling his heart clench. "The day after punishment, we always pretend nothing happened," Peter replied, looking away. "It's the rule." The boy's silence spoke more than 1,000 words. George felt a wave of fury course through his body. He needed all his willpower to remain calm and not abandon his disguise at that instant. "Listen," he said, crouching down to the children's height. "No one is going to punish you today, I promise." "But how?" Mary asked, wiping away her tears. "She always keeps her promises." "Trust me. Tonight will be different." Sebastian took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the girl's tears. "Now, I want you to stay quiet in here. I'll leave the door unlocked, but don't come out until either I or Miss Julia come back to get you, understood?" The children nodded, looking at him with a mixture of hope and distrust. They had been betrayed by adults so many times that they no longer knew whom to trust. "Mr. Sebastian," Peter called out as the gardener was leaving, "will Daddy be back from his trip soon?" The question hit George like a punch to the gut. The longing in his son's eyes was palpable. "Sooner than you imagine," he assured them, his voice choked. Upon returning to the main hall, Sebastian saw that the party was reaching its peak. Patricia circulated among the guests, radiant and charming, clearly in her element. Several influential businessmen surrounded her, enchanted by her beauty and intelligence. "Your wife is extraordinary," one of them commented to Robert, one of the directors of George's company, who had been invited to represent the absent husband. "George is a lucky man." "Certainly," Robert replied, without much enthusiasm. He had worked with George for years, and although he had never openly expressed it, had never hidden his disapproval of his friend's new marriage. Sebastian strategically positioned himself near Patricia while serving drinks. It was then that he noticed Julia talking to some female guests, showing them photos on her phone. The young teacher was creating the perfect distraction, talking about educational methods and the children's progress. A few meters away, Sebastian overheard a conversation between Patricia and a lawyer known for millionaire divorce cases. "Everything is proceeding as we discussed," the man said in a low voice. "The documents will be presented as soon as he returns from his trip. With the witnesses we have and the evidence of paternal neglect, custody will be practically guaranteed." "And the alimony?" Patricia questioned, taking a sip of champagne. "Considering his assets, it will be substantial. Furthermore, with the argument of emotional compensation for the children's separation from the maternal figure, we can significantly increase the amount of the settlement." Patricia's smile was that of a predator who had just cornered her prey. "Perfect. He has no idea what awaits him." Sebastian walked away, feeling nauseous. The conversation had been captured by the recorder positioned on the side table, but it wasn't yet enough evidence. He needed something more damning, something that would reveal Patricia's true nature regarding the children. Around midnight, as the first guests began to say their goodbyes, an unexpected incident created the opportunity Sebastian was waiting for. Robert, the company director and George's friend, approached Patricia with a serious expression. "Patricia, I'd like to see the children before I go. George asked me to check on them." Patricia's smile faltered for an instant. "They're asleep, Robert. It would be a shame to wake them." "George insisted," he replied firmly. "He said they miss him and asked me to bring detailed news." Patricia looked around, calculating the situation. Several guests were still present, and a direct refusal would seem suspicious. "Of course, how careless of me. Let's go see them together." Sebastian discreetly followed them down the corridor, along with some other guests who, curious, wanted to accompany the visit to the adorable Anderson children. Upon opening the bedroom door, Patricia froze. The bed was empty. "Where are they?" Robert asked, frowning. At that moment, children's voices were heard coming from the next room, the room that had belonged to Florence, the children's late mother, and that Patricia had transformed into her personal closet. The room had been forbidden to Peter and Mary since the new marriage. Patricia stormed across the corridor like a fury, violently opening the closet door. Inside, Peter and Mary were sitting on the floor in front of an open box containing photographs and belongings of Florence. "What do you think you're doing?" Patricia shrieked, momentarily forgetting the guests behind her. "I forbade you from coming in here, forbade you." The children cowered, terrified. Mary held a photograph of their biological mother, and Peter had a small sapphire brooch that had belonged to Florence in his hands. "We just wanted to see Mommy's things," Peter explained in a trembling voice. "We miss her." "Your mother is dead. Dead. When will you understand that?" Patricia's voice rose dangerously, laden with venom. "I am your mother now. I'm the one who takes care of you while your father is too busy to even call." Robert and the other guests watched the scene, paralyzed by shock. Patricia's transformation was terrifying, from the elegant hostess to an out-of-control woman in a matter of seconds. "Patricia, calm down," Robert intervened, trying to pull her away from the children. "They are just memories of their mother." "Don't interfere," she screamed, pushing him away. "These children need to learn that there are consequences for disobedience." When Patricia advanced towards Mary, raising her hand with clear intent to strike her, Julia suddenly appeared, placing herself between the woman and the child. "No!" exclaimed the teacher, protecting Mary with her own body. The slap intended for the girl hit Julia's face with enough force to leave a red mark. An astonished silence filled the room. The shocked guests witnessed the scene, unable to believe what they were seeing. "How dare you?" Patricia stammered, suddenly aware of the audience. "You will not hurt these children," Julia declared, her cheek stinging, but her gaze firm. "Not in front of me." Patricia looked around, noticing the horror in the guests' eyes. Her carefully constructed castle of lies began to crumble. "You don't understand," she tried to explain, forcing a smile. "The children have disciplinary problems. Sometimes one needs to be firm." "Firm?" questioned one of the women who had previously praised her. "You were going to hit a child for looking at photos of her deceased mother." "It's not what it seems," Patricia insisted, her social veneer rapidly dissolving. It was at this crucial moment that Sebastian stepped forward. Not as the hunched old gardener, but upright, with his shoulders back and a presence that immediately drew everyone's attention. "It's exactly what it seems," he declared, his voice now without the forced accent, clear and authoritative, the voice of George Anderson. "And I have proof that this has been happening for months." In a deliberate gesture, he brought his hands to his face and removed the fake beard, then his glasses, and finally straightened his posture completely. A murmur of astonishment swept through those present as they recognized the owner of the house. "Daddy!" exclaimed Peter and Mary in unison, with expressions of awe and joy. Patricia looked as if she had seen a ghost. Her face, previously contorted with rage, was now ashen white. "George? But you were traveling. How?" "Surprise, darling," he replied with a cold smile. "It seems I arrived just in time to see your true face." The revelation caused a stir among the guests. Robert was the first to recover from the shock, approaching his friend with a look of understanding. He had been the only one to know about the plan from the beginning. The children ran to their father, clinging to his legs as if they feared he might disappear again. George knelt down and hugged them tightly, tears streaming down his undisguised face. "It's all right now," he whispered. "Daddy's here, and I'm not going anywhere." Julia remained motionless, her hand still on her struck face, looking at Sebastian, now George, with an expression of complete disbelief. The entire situation finally made sense. The gardener's excessive interest in the children, his detailed knowledge of the house, his determination to protect the little ones. Meanwhile, Patricia, realizing the magnitude of the disaster, attempted one last desperate move. "This is absurd. You disguised yourself to spy on me. That's illegal. I'll sue you for invasion of privacy." "You can try," George replied calmly, taking the small recorders from his pocket. "But first, I think everyone here would like to hear what you say when you think no one important is listening." The silence that followed George's revelation was dense, almost palpable. The guests, previously animated by the elegant party, now witnessed in astonishment the unfolding of a drama no one could have predicted. Patricia remained motionless, her face oscillating between expressions of shock, anger, and finally, a calculated composure. "George, darling, this is a misunderstanding," she tried, her voice suddenly sweet and conciliatory. "You arrived at an inopportune moment. The children disobeyed me and I just—" "Enough lies," George interrupted, his voice firm but controlled. Pressing a button on the small recorder, he allowed Patricia's words to echo through the silent room. "The children are my ticket to the Anderson fortune. The will is clear. If he wants to maintain control of his father's businesses, he needs to ensure the heirs remain under the family name." Other recordings followed. Patricia humiliating the children when she thought she was alone, planning the divorce with her friend. Caroline discussing legal strategies to maximize the settlement, and even instructing Peter and Mary to say they missed their father when in front of specific witnesses. With each new revelation, Patricia's face hardened further. When the recordings ended, she looked around and realized there was no longer an escape. Her carefully constructed facade had completely crumbled. "You can't prove anything," she challenged in a last effort. "These recordings were obtained illegally. No judge will accept them." "Perhaps," George agreed, "but I don't need them in court. What I needed was the truth, for myself, for our friends, and especially for my children." Turning to the still present guests, George continued, "I apologize for the unexpected spectacle. As you can see, there are family matters that need to be resolved. I thank everyone for their presence, but the party is over." Robert, a long-time friend, took the initiative to escort the guests out, while Mrs. Zola discreetly assisted in the process. In a matter of minutes, the mansion emptied, leaving only the family and the closest staff. "You'll regret this," Patricia threatened when they were alone. "No one makes a mockery of me and gets away with it." George looked at the woman he had married just 8 months ago, wondering how he could have been so blind. "Your bags will be ready in an hour," he declared, emotionless. "My lawyer will contact you tomorrow to discuss the terms of the divorce. Until then, I want you out of this house. This is my home too." "Not anymore. And be grateful I'm not pressing charges for child abuse against my children." Patricia cast one last contemptuous glance at the children, who remained clinging to their father. "These brats, you don't know how lucky you are, but don't worry, George. One day, they'll grow up and see the absent father you truly are." With that, she turned and headed to the master bedroom, slamming the door shut. George took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past weeks partially dissipate. He looked at Peter and Mary, who stared back with still uncertain expressions, as if they feared he might disappear again, or that it was all just a dream. "It's all right now," he assured them, hugging them again. "Daddy is really here." "Aren't you going to travel anymore?" Peter asked, his small voice betraying his fear of abandonment. "Not for a long time, and when I do need to travel, you'll come with me." Mary, always more observant, stared fixedly at her father's face, now without the disguise. "You were Mr. Sebastian all along. Is that why you knew about Mommy's photo?" George smiled, admiring his daughter's perceptiveness. "Yes, little one. It was me trying to find out what was happening when I wasn't home." The girl frowned, processing the information. "But why didn't you just say it was you?" "Because I needed to see how things really were. Sometimes we need to see with our own eyes to believe." It was then that George noticed Julia standing near the door, still stunned by the revelation, the mark of the slap still visible on her face. "Children, why don't you go with Mrs. Zola to eat something in the kitchen? You must be hungry after all this commotion." Mrs. Zola, who was watching the scene with tears in her eyes, nodded and extended her hands to the little ones. "Come, I have chocolate cake waiting for you." When the children left with the housekeeper, George and Julia finally found themselves alone. The silence between them was heavy with unasked questions. "You deceived me," she finally said, her voice low but firm. "Yes," George admitted, without trying to justify himself, "and I'm sorry for it." "Why didn't you trust me? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" "At first, I didn't trust anyone. Later it became more complicated to confess the lie." Julia gently touched the mark on her face, and George approached, concerned. "We need to put some ice on that. Let's go to the kitchen." She allowed him to guide her. In the kitchen, the children were already devouring the promised cake with an enthusiasm they hadn't shown in a long time. George prepared an ice pack and handed it to Julia. "Thank you," she murmured, applying the ice to her cheek. "Not just for this, but for finally doing something." "I should be thanking you," he replied. "You protected my children when I couldn't. You literally placed yourself between them and danger." Julia shrugged, as if her act of courage was the most natural thing in the world. Any decent person would do the same. "No, Julia, not just anyone. You risked your job, your safety. That takes a special kind of courage." And, an hour later, as promised, Patricia's bags were in the entrance hall. She descended the stairs wearing an elegant travel outfit, as if merely heading out for a social engagement, not being expelled from the house she had planned to claim for herself. "This isn't over," she declared, as the driver loaded her luggage into the car. "For me, it ended the moment you raised your hand to my daughter," George replied calmly. "Goodbye, Patricia." When the car finally disappeared through the mansion gates, George felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He went back inside, where the children waited for him in the living room, still wary, as if they feared the newly won peace might evaporate at any moment. "And now, Daddy?" Peter asked, ever practical. "Now we're going to rebuild our family," George replied, sitting between the two on the sofa. "It will take time to erase the marks these past months have left, but we will do it together." "Is Miss Julia leaving too?" Mary questioned, worried. George looked at the young woman, who remained discreetly beside Mrs. Zola. "That depends on her. I think after everything that's happened, she has every right to look for a less complicated job." Julia smiled shyly. "Actually, I'm thinking of staying. If you still want me as the children's tutor, of course. After what you did today, Julia, you have a place in this house for as long as you wish." In the days that followed, the Anderson mansion gradually transformed. The heavy curtains Patricia had preferred were replaced by lighter ones, allowing the natural London light to flood the rooms. Toys once again occupied the previously impeccably organized spaces, and the sound of children's laughter echoed through the corridors again. George reorganized his work schedule, delegating more responsibilities so he could be present in his children's lives. The emotional scars left by Patricia wouldn't disappear overnight. Peter still had occasional nightmares, and Mary sometimes flinched when an adult made a sudden movement. But with patience and much love, the family began to heal. Julia became a constant and comforting presence. Her teaching method, which prioritized curiosity and creativity over disciplinary rigidity, helped the children rediscover the joy of learning. George often found her in the garden with the little ones, reading stories in the shade of the trees that Sebastian had cared for so meticulously. On a particularly beautiful afternoon, about a month after the events of that fateful night, George watched from the terrace as Julia taught the twins to plant sunflower seeds. "These will be your flowers," she explained, helping them cover the seeds with soil. "You planted them, you will watch them grow." "Will they grow taller than us?" Peter asked, fascinated. "Much taller. Sunflowers can grow taller than an adult." "Like Daddy when he was Mr. Sebastian," Mary laughed, referring to the disguise that, surprisingly, had become a family inside joke. Julia also laughed, looking up and meeting George's gaze. Something silent and meaningful passed between them, a mutual understanding, an unstated promise. Later that day, when the children were already in bed, George found Julia on the veranda, watching the stars over the River Thames. "Did the children sleep well?" she asked as he approached. "Like angels. Peter hasn't had nightmares for 3 nights in a row." "That's a victory. One of many, thanks to you." Julia turned to face him, the London moonlight softening her features even more. "It wasn't me, it was themselves and you. They are resilient children." "As are you," George observed. "I never properly thanked you for everything you did." "There's nothing to thank me for, I just did what any decent person would do," he completed, smiling. "But we both know that's not true. You risked everything for 2 children you barely knew." Julia lowered her gaze, suddenly shy. I like them, they're special. As are you. The silence that followed was charged with possibilities. George knew it was too soon. The wounds of the failed marriage were still fresh, and the children needed stability, not more changes. But there was something undeniable growing between him and the young teacher, something born on the improbable ground of shared suffering and courage. Do you know what sunflowers do? Julia asked, breaking the silence. Besides growing taller than an adult, he joked. They follow the sun, she explained. Throughout the entire day they turn to track its path across the sky. It's called heliotropism, as if they instinctively know where to find the light. Exactly. George understood the implicit metaphor. After a period of darkness, his family was slowly turning towards the light again. The sunflowers we planted today, Julia continued, will blossom in a few weeks. But the seeds that truly matter, trust, security, love, those will take longer. Time we have, George assured her, and patience too. Good gardeners always do, she replied with a smile. A few months later, when the London summer reached its peak, the sunflowers in the Anderson garden bloomed majestically, just as the friendship between George and Julia gradually blossomed into something deeper. There was no rush. Both knew that the most valuable things grow at their own pace. Peter and Mary, free from the shadow of fear, returned to being children, mischievous, curious, occasionally disobedient, but always unconditionally loved. The mansion, once a stage for manipulations and disguised cruelty, transformed into what it should always have been, a home. One Sunday afternoon, as the family and Julia had lunch in the garden, surrounded by the now fully bloomed sunflowers, Mary asked the question that had long been in the air. Miss Julia, do you like my father? Julia choked on her juice, while George tried to hide a smile. What makes you think that, Mary? She asked, blushing intensely. It's just that you look at him the same way sunflowers look at the sun, the girl explained, with the simple, direct wisdom of children. Peter, ever practical, added, and Daddy looks at you like that too, we noticed. Didn't we, Dad? George, surprised by his children's perceptiveness, met Julia's gaze across the table. There was no longer any need for disguises or secrets, not in that family rebuilt on foundations of truth and trust. Yes, he finally admitted, that's exactly how I look at her. Julia smiled, no longer trying to hide what was becoming increasingly evident. Like the sunflowers around them, some feelings naturally turn towards the light, even after periods of shadow. And so, in that reborn garden in the heights of London, a new family began to blossom, not defined by blood ties or legal documents, but by a daily commitment to truth, respect, and genuine love. An imperfect family, constantly growing, instinctively turning towards the light, even when, especially when, the sun seemed too distant. Dear listeners, we hope the story of George, Julia, Peter, and Mary has touched your hearts. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other incredible stories of new beginnings and second chances. Find it by clicking here. If you were moved by this journey of love, courage, and family protection, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of human relationships and the capacity for reconstruction after difficult times. Who knows what the next story will be that makes your heart beat faster? We await you in the comments to share your impressions of this family that, like the sunflowers, knew how to turn towards the light even in the darkest moments.